So, today we're going to dig into the hidden story of something we all just take for granted, the actual ground under our feet. We're going to trace this wild journey of how the very idea of American property was invented, transforming physical soil into, well, a complex financial stock.
If you've ever been on a plane flying over the middle of the country, you've seen this. It's just a seemingly endless grid of farms and roads, a giant checkerboard stretching out to the horizon. But that pattern? Yeah, that's not natural. It's a design. It's an idea about order and rationality that was literally stamped onto the landscape. And figuring out where that came from, that's the key to understanding how modern America was built.
Okay, so to really get this, we've got to go way back. Before the grid, there was a totally different map of North America, an invisible one, made up of a complex, messy patchwork of competing legal systems. What you find is a continent that was anything but simple. See, American property law didn't just show up in a vacuum. It landed on a continent that was already crisscrossed with legal claims from the Spanish, the French, the Dutch, and of course, thousands of years of indigenous law. And this is where you see this just massive clash of worldviews. On one side, you had indigenous systems that often saw land as a relationship, something to be cared for and used by the community. On the other side, you had the European idea of ownership, which saw land as a possession, a thing to be owned by one person, locked down with a legal title, and sold for cash.
And this legal patchwork wasn't just some abstract idea. Each empire brought its own rulebook. You had the Spanish in the Southwest and Florida using Catholic legal doctrines. The French were setting up these feudal-style concessions and trading rights all through the Mississippi Basin. And then, and this is the big one, you had the British on the East Coast bringing their common law and this really powerful idea of private individual title. That's what really set the stage for everything that came next.
So you've got this incredibly complex legal landscape, and right into the middle of it walks the brand new United States. The new nation makes a really radical decision to just erase all that complexity and invent one single, unified system. This is the story of how they turned a continent of shared commons into a nation of sellable commodities. And the main tool they used for this huge undertaking was the Land Ordinance of 1785. Now, this wasn't just another law. It was basically an engineering manual for building a nation. It created what's called the Public Land Survey System, a machine designed to turn territory into private property as fast as possible. So how'd this machine actually work? Well, it was a brutally effective four-step process. Step 1, erase. Just nullify all the claims that were there before. Step 2, impose. Slap a rational mathematical grid over the land, completely ignoring things like rivers, mountains, or what was actually there. Step 3, subdivide. Chop up those grid squares into smaller, sellable pieces. And finally, step 4, sell. Transfer those pieces into private hands with a secure, government-backed title. And this right here is the big deal, the huge philosophical leap. This system wasn't just about measuring things. It was about changing what land is. As the source material puts it so well, this process turned Earth into abstract value. It made land legible to capital. Suddenly, land wasn't so much a place anymore. It was an asset. Okay, so the country is now one giant grid, ready to be carved up and sold. But who gets it and how? Well, this brings us to one of the most powerful stories America tells about itself, the myth of free land and the Homestead Act. I mean, the scale of this is just mind-blowing. Under the Homestead Act of 1862, the U.S. government handed over 270 million acres of land to private citizens. To put that in perspective, that's more than the entire area of Texas and California combined, privatized in just a couple of generations. But hang on a second. This whole idea was built on giving away something called public land. So you have to ask, where did this so-called public land actually come from? Was it just empty? Just sitting there waiting for people? Well, the really hard truth here is that the whole thing was built on a legal fiction. Our source material describes it as a massive laundering of indigenous land into private title. The only way you could have public land to give away was through the violent removal of native nations from their homes, a process backed up by military force and then sealed by law. And this idea of using property law to draw lines between people to decide who gets to belong and who doesn't, it didn't stop in the 19th century. In the 20th century, the legal scholar Cheryl I. Harris made this powerful argument that whiteness itself became a form of property. Things like zoning laws and redlining used property as a tool to enforce racial segregation, making sure the chance to build wealth through homeownership was kept mostly for white Americans.
All right, this brings us to our final chapter. This is where that whole process of abstraction, which started with a simple grid on a map, goes into overdrive in the world of modern finance. We've officially gone from soil to stock. You can really see this evolution in 4 clear stages. It starts with soil, a physical place, an ecosystem. Then the grid comes along and turns it into a standardized unit. A legal title turns that unit into a secure possession. And today, land has become almost a pure financial asset, just a number in a global portfolio, almost completely disconnected from the actual ground it represents. One of the key tools for this today is something called a REIT. That's a real estate investment trust. Basically, think of it like this. It's a company that bundles up huge portfolios of property, apartment buildings, malls, whole neighborhoods, and lets people trade shares of it on the stock market, just like you trade shares of Apple or Google. Okay, so what? Why does this matter? Well, this quote really hits it home. The owner is increasingly faceless, the use increasingly speculative, and the land increasingly alienated from the people who live on it. Think about it. When your landlord isn't a person but some anonymous global fund, that connection between a community and the place it lives, it just breaks. So what's the big takeaway here? The way we own land, it isn't some law of nature. It's not inevitable. It's a system of rules that people designed, built, and changed over centuries. And that really leaves us with one last big question to chew on. If property is our own invention, what should we be asking it to do for us now?